Good afternoon. I'm Victoria Wright. I'm the Marketing and Outreach Coordinator for the Department of Procurement Services. And this workshop is Contracting 101, how to respond to an RFP. Is everybody here for that workshop? Okay. So everyone should have signed the sign-in sheet and taken the handouts. Out there you have an example of an RFP, the buying plan, DPS alert card, which we always recommend that people sign up for DPS alerts. We send out our bid opportunity list every Monday through a bid opportunity list. And, we send the bid opportunity list through a DPS alert every Monday. And any pertinent procurement information will go out on either on a Wednesday or a Friday. And the evaluation form. So I'm going to ask that everybody fill out an evaluation before they leave, and I will collect that at the end. We do have to let you know that all of our workshops are now being live streamed to YouTube. So this class is right now on YouTube, and you can watch it later. If you're watching from home, you can get the PowerPoints, and if you all in class want to get the PowerPoint afterwards, you can find it on our website up under Events and Outreach. So we do recommend, if you can't come in, that you could watch it on YouTube. You just won't be able to ask any questions at that time. So since we are doing live streaming, we're going to ask that you hold your questions to the end, and the speaker will answer your questions at the end. She will repeat your question and answer your question for the people at home so that they can also hear your question. Okay. We do end right at 3:30 because it's a live stream. But if there are any questions or anything going on, the speaker and myself will be in the room afterwards. If we can't answer your questions, we'll make sure we get your business card and have somebody get back to you immediately. So I'm going to turn it over now to Rona, and she is going to host this workshop today. And I will be back at 3:30 to collect everybody's evaluation form. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to City Hall in the Bid and Bond Room. My name is Rona Gianco. My information is on this document that you should have picked up at the table outside. We will be reviewing this document today, so it's a good resource. And my contact information is on this document if you need to reach me at a later time for any reason. So this is the how to respond to a request for proposal workshop, how to respond to an RFP. And I'm going to kind of repeat a few things that Victoria just mentioned, but if you look at the presentation, oops, wrong way. Okay, so the city issues bids and RFPs, and also RFQs, but we'll just be talking about RFPs for the most part. Any bids or RFPs that are valued over $100,000 are always advertised in the Chicago Sun-Times. All bids and RFPs, regardless of the value of them, are posted on the Department of Procurement Services, or DPS, the DPS website, which is www.cityofchicago.org/DPS. You should always go back and look at that page. It's a very great resource because it gets updated really on a daily basis. You will always see every bid or RFP that the city is issuing at any time. Bid opportunities are also posted in a document that you can find here at City Hall, here in the Bid and Bond Room. We're in room 103. And you can get copies of any bid or RFP, usually in paper form or on CD-ROM, if you don't download them from the city's website. We do have a buying plan, and you should have a copy of that in your hand. We have them at the front desk. And that is really the city's, if you can imagine, the city's kind of catalog. It's every planned bid or RFP or every project that every city department is planning to purchase for the next, I think it's 4 quarters, so the next year. There is sometimes some information on what some of our sister agencies are intending to purchase for a period of time as well. So we get a lot of questions about, oh, when is the city planning on buying computers? And this buying plan is actually an excellent resource because you can flip to any particular department and get an idea of what type of services or items we are looking to purchase. Every bid and every RFP, we have what's called a pre-bid or pre-submittal conference, and this is actually a live meeting that you can attend to learn about any specific project or bid that is being issued at any time. They are not mandatory. We do recommend them. We get a lot of potential vendors, a lot of companies that attend these. It's a great way to network with companies that are doing business in the city of Chicago. And what I think is the biggest value of attending these pre-bid or pre-submittal conferences is that you get to speak to the procurement specialist that is issuing the RFP or bid, and so you can ask any questions of them and really get a clear understanding about the project, and any questions that may not be totally transparent with the paper document that is issued. So definitely look, I would suggest attending some of these pre-bid or pre-submittal conferences. Lastly, let's say you can't attend a pre-bid conference, but you're interested in knowing who might have attended, maybe who are your competitors if you're looking for a specific project, or who is interested in bidding on a certain project. We always issue what's called a bid takeout list, and that means whoever has attended the pre-bid conferences and also who has picked up the solicitations or has registered to get any updates about a particular solicitation. So those are all very important things to understand, and really just the tip of the iceberg of what there is to know about RFPs and bids. So we will be moving on. What is an RFP and what is a competitive bid? So essentially an RFP, or a request for proposal, is the method of procurement that we use to hire service consultants. And I use that service consultants term very broadly, but essentially it outlines a project that the city wants to do, and we kind of have, certain parameters that we're looking for, and we use the RFP to provide that information to see who is qualified and has the experience and is interested in providing and potentially providing those services to the city. It is project specific, and that is in contrast to the request for qualifications that we sometimes use, which is not project specific, but that's another workshop, I believe. And we use RFPs, or we look for services using RFPs when the city does not have the in-house capability to provide the services. So let's say, for example, the city is looking for auditors, but all of the auditors that are actually employed by the city are already tied up doing other projects, or we need, let's say, 10 additional auditors to provide service. We would use an RFP, provide the parameters of the project that are looking for, and advertise that to seek, let's say, 10 auditors that can provide a specific type of service for us. A competitive bid, however, is the method of procurement that we use to purchase supplies, equipment, repair services, and the like. The bids have very detailed specifications. We may specify particular quantities or particular sizes, particular materials, so it's very specific. And we may specify an indefinite usage. So maybe we don't know how many, how many pens, right, each department will purchase, and so we kind of have to make a general estimate, but it may exceed the quantities that we expect. So sometimes those quantities are undefined. Those are really the general differences between the RFP and the bid. If you have any questions, just write them down because we'll answer them at the end. And I know sometimes questions come up at the moment that we're doing them. So additional differences between the RFP and the competitive bid is that the bid specification is very detailed, whereas an RFP will kind of describe objectives and a general scope of service, but it won't specify in detail how the jobs will be done. So I used this auditor example previously, right? We'll just say, we need auditors that are that have experience in these particular industries or with these types of projects, but we won't specify like on a daily basis how the work is done from day to day. A big difference between an RFP and a bid is that an RFP, so once we get a response to an RFP, there's actually an evaluation committee that has been predefined, and there's evaluation guidelines that have already been set, and the responses for the RFPs get vetted through the evaluation committee. So there's scoring and weights that are used to determine who is the highest qualified or the most qualified respondent, whereas in a competitive bid, the award goes to the lowest responsive and the most responsible bidder. So in RFPs, price plays a big part, but it's not the ultimate determinant, whereas with bids, price is a really huge and really the primary factor that we're looking at. We're going to be looking at the RFP handout that you should have in your hands. So this is actually an RFP that I issued last year. And it's for controlled substance analysis and testing. This is really it's drug testing that uses hair. So you can see the front cover indicates a specification number, and that's really important. The city issues so many RFPs and bids, and really the specification number is probably your most important identifier. If you ever call anybody, if you call me asking about a particular project, the specification number is the most, I should say, the best number that you could give me to quickly identify what project you're talking about. So you can see here on this document, it identifies that the police department, the fire department, and public health are the departments that are issuing or asking for these services. You can also see my information, a pre-proposal conference. That's what I was talking about earlier. We were talking about pre-bid, pre-submittal conference. The pre-proposal conference will be held on September 3rd. It gives you the location, and then it also identifies the due date of this, right? When we want responses in for this project. So when you look at these documents, and this is the document, remember I was saying go online and you can download some of these documents. This is actually the type of document that you will download. We call these solicitations. So this this includes all of the information that is pertinent for any particular project. Some of the information in here is very standard across the board with any city project, but there are some variances. So we may use city funding for a project, and this happens to be a city-funded project. Some projects may be state or federally funded, and the type of funding that is anticipated for a project really drives a lot of the requirements that we ask for. Particularly, if you look at the slide, we talk about MBE, WBE, and DBE goals. Do I have the right thing up there? So MBE is minority business-owned enterprise, WBE is women business-owned enterprise, and DBE is disadvantaged business enterprise. And those classifications are kind of aligned with the type of funding that a project has. So you'll see the fourth bullet point indicates that MBE and WBE goals are typically found for all city-funded projects. And right now, kind of the standard that the city looks to achieve is 25% participation for minority business enterprise and 5% participation for women-owned business enterprises. There's obviously many cases in which those goals may not be achieved. Maybe if it's like a very niche project, maybe there aren't enough women businesses that provide service in that area. but we really look to the department that is requesting those projects to determine the feasibility of achieving 25 MBE participation and 5% WBE participation. The same thing goes for DBE goals, and again, we're looking at state and federally funded projects. Okay, so we're talking about RFPs today and the proposal format that the city typically looks for. These are really just kind of overarching formats that the city asks for. We always ask for 8 and 11 size paper. We prefer that it's recycled. We discourage any sort of expensive binding. Sometimes we get like these really beautiful, like, you know, packages, and they come in these huge boxes, but inevitably, once they're submitted to us, they get, you know, taken apart because we have evaluation teams that need to look at them. So paper clips, binder clips, that's really all that we're looking for. Nothing kind of extra and super snazzy really needs to be submitted. We always request an original with original signatures on them, and then the solicitation will identify how many copies of that original document should be submitted. And what really drives that number, sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 6 or 10. That usually, it depends on the number of evaluators that are on that committee that will eventually determine who's most qualified or not. And those copies get disseminated to the evaluation team for review. We ask that the sections of the proposals be separated by labels and tabs. And I'll go into a pretty concise reason why we ask for that. And we just ask that they are very well organized. So the next slide goes into RFP content. And there's quite a bit of information that the city asks for. So if you look at the document that you have in your hand, on page 1, you'll see that there's just a general invitation and a summary about this project. So this was the police department, fire and public health. They're looking for proposals from firms with expertise in providing essentially drug testing services that use hair, and the reasons why they are looking for these services. And then on page 2, we get into a very specific explanation of the scope of services that these departments are looking for. So we go from screening services to storage requirements, how they want results provided, what the specifications are, how the test what types of test results and in what format they want it to be reported in. So there's actually many pages of the scope of service. And then when you get to page 7, you'll see that there's some instruction about you can only speak to essentially the procurement services person. For this project, it was me, so all questions must be directed to me. And the reason that we do that is really just to have a single point of contact, because you may call, let's say, my manager or my teammate, but it's not really their project, right? I'm the one that's been working with the department, and I'm the one that has the basis of knowledge for this project. So we're really just asking you to direct all your questions to a single point of contact so that the message is always the same. You're not getting different answers from different people. We, again, discuss the pre-proposal conference and the purpose for that. We explain the deadline and the procedure for submitting proposals. They always get addressed here to the bid and bond room. You'd be surprised how many packages we get upstairs on the 8th floor, which is where our department is, but it's really bid and bond that's responsible for keeping it confidential and, you know, not letting anybody see it before it's time for the proposals to be opened. So it's actually a very secure process. When you get to page 10, we have the beginning of where we talk about required information, and this is very important. Because in the evaluation of the submissions, we look at the required information that was requested. So for example, If you flip to page 11, we talk about the cover letter. So we're asking for general information about the company that is submitting a proposal, the number of years of their experience, the legal name of the entity and the headquarter address, your ability to apply to comply with MBEWB requirements, if you have any objections to our standard agreement. All of these different things are very important when a proposal gets evaluated by our committee. There's an executive summary. We ask for, on the bottom of page 11, qualifications and specialized experience of your company or your team members. We also ask for background information about the company. In this scenario, we're asking for a minimum of 3 references that shows that you have done this work of a similar scope and magnitude. If you flip to page 13, we ask about your company's capacity to perform the project. If you're a City of Chicago business, if you're registered to do business in the state of Illinois, the list continues onto page 14. We ask for qualifications and experience of key personnel that would be dedicated to this project if you were selected. We go on to just providing a summary of your project management and implementation plan, which would include an organization chart, any dedicated resources like software or applicable technology. So you can see that the required information that we're looking for is actually quite lengthy. And I always suggest for people that are planning to submit an RFP or a bid that you really pay attention to this required content section and almost use it as a checklist when you're preparing to submit your proposal or your bid to the City of Chicago. This is really everything laid out for you to know exactly what we are asking for. On page 16, the list actually continues, so we talk about WBE commitment to the project. We ask for 3 years of audited financial statements, and the city always asks for an economic disclosure statement, and this is very important. I don't believe that every municipality does it, but it's very important to the City of Chicago, and this is really just it's actually an online system that the city has. Every company that does business with the City of Chicago must complete an EDS. We ask for a lot of background information and ownership information about your company, but we go pretty deep and we ask for who is your parent company? Are there any grandparent companies? Who has ownership? Who has individual ownership of your company? We really want to have a very good picture of who the city is doing business with, so that is important. We continue on page 17 to ask you to describe any legal actions that your company may have had, and also if you can comply with the insurance requirements that are set out. And that doesn't mean that you need to provide insurance today necessarily, but it says, yes, we understand the insurance requirements that the city has put forth, and that you have the ability to comply if you are selected as a vendor, that you would be able to provide insurance at the levels that we are requesting. All right. So we're going to talk about evaluation criteria, and this is just very general. The criteria may be different depending on the projects, but for the most part, this is pretty standard. For RFPs, there are 3 phases of evaluation that we do. The first is really just a preliminary proposal assessment. And you know how I was saying that the required content is almost like a checklist of what we're looking for in these proposals? Phase 1 is a review of this checklist, right? Did they submit their business license? Did they submit references? We literally just go down the list. Did they submit everything? It's actually kind of surprising. Every time I have an RFP or an RFQ, sometimes something is just absolutely missing. And we don't really know why, but you can imagine if you didn't submit any references for a project, that's a pretty huge deficiency when we review your proposal. So that checklist is very important. If through the phase 1 evaluation, the proposal or the submission is found to be missing many items, it can be deemed non-responsive at that phase and never even go on to phase 2 or phase 3. So that's a pretty big deal, phase 1. Even though we don't dig deep, if you're missing something like references, that can knock you out of the game at the very beginning. So phase 2 is the kind of the true proposal evaluation. We really go through all of the qualifications, the experience, your implementation plan. We go through, we determine from what was submitted whether you meet the specifications that were laid out in the scope of services. Before proposals are submitted by the public to the city, the criterion and any scoring methodologies have already been determined at that time, before submissions have been submitted to the city. And so that kind of allows us to, we find that we want it to kind of build public trust, right? The evaluation criteria is set before any submissions are brought in. So let's say our favorite vendor submits something, the scoring is not swayed by anything that they have provided us at that time. So it's just a good way for us to really just stay honest and stay, true to the business that the city has to do. So as part of the evaluation process, every evaluation committee member will review the proposals and score them. And then we also have a team evaluation that's done. So we kind of take into consideration these 2 levels of scores. And from those scores, we may make a determination that a phase 3 evaluation is possible. And usually phase 3 is what we call a short list. So the most qualified vendors, based on the scores for the RFP, will then get moved into another phase of evaluation. And that's just another level of evaluation that allows us to ask questions of them, have them maybe do another presentation for us. We can potentially do a site visit or like a software demonstration. So it's really just a higher level of evaluation that is available to us if we need to do that. There are some cases that a phase 3 evaluation is not needed, but I would say for the most part, we always do phase 3 evaluations. We want to make sure that we're making the right decision and selecting the vendors that are best capable of doing the job. So if you look at page 18, you'll see the evaluation criteria. We always look at professional and technical competence. On the next page, the quality, comprehensiveness, and adequacy of the proposed project management or implementation plan, the compensation schedule, if there are any legal actions that may adversely affect the projects that we're planning to do with a particular vendor, the financial stability of the company that's responding, whether they can comply with laws, ordinance, and statutes that have been outlined in the solicitation, and if there's any conflict of interest. The solicitations always include a sample contract or a sample agreement, so you can kind of see the parameters that the city sets forth. Sometimes companies won't necessarily agree with sections of that, and this gives you the opportunity to let us know what that is and whether we have the ability to negotiate that or not. So page 20 kind of describes the phase 3 process, which is what I was telling you was either a site visit or a system demonstration. In this scenario, it is a site visit and an oral presentation. And that is really it for the evaluation process or the evaluation criteria. So next slide is tips for preparing an RFP. This is enormous document. It was actually 170 pages. I've only given you about half of that. What I did not give you was the sample contract that is typically put in here, but it is a huge document. There are 9 exhibits. It's a solicitation. So we always suggest that you read this document really from back to back. There's so much information here, and I know sometimes it's easier just to call and ask a question and get that answer, but there really is a lot of information here that I think would add to the value of any submission that you were putting together. If you do happen to have questions after reading any solicitation, we always ask that you put your questions in writing. And for this, obviously, I would be the person responding to you, but it's always to the person that's identified on the first page. There is usually a deadline to ask questions, so please make sure that you pay attention to that. The third bullet point is to be responsive to the RFP submittal requirements, and that goes back to that required content information. Just make sure that if we're asking for a certain piece of information, you really should be submitting that. If you're being asked to submit a cost proposal, in most cases you will be, we ask that you use the format that is set forth in the RFP. Be a responsible vendor. So verify that your company actually has the ability and the capacity to perform these contracts. That's actually a pretty common question that we get. For example, I'm a new company, I just started 6 months ago. I want to bid on this project, but I don't really have a lot of experience, right? But when you look at the specification, it'll say 5 years experience providing similar scope and magnitude, right? Services of similar scope and magnitude. So you can really, we try to be pretty straightforward with what we're looking for. So if you don't necessarily meet those specifications, then, we ask that you kind of just be mindful of what we're looking for. Of course, you can partner with other companies, right, to try to get to the place where those services are matching what we're asking for in these solicitations. But sometimes we do get proposals that are a very big mismatch. And we don't, putting a response together for these RFPs and these bids, it's a lot of time. I mean, look at this thing, it's 170 pages. So we don't want to waste your time. I mean, you're probably better off just giving us a call and saying, I just started my company, is this a good fit for me? So if there is a mandatory requirement, avoid taking exceptions to that requirement. We do have a lot of mandatory requirements. And a lot of people do take exceptions to them. It usually doesn't fare so well. If it's mandatory, there's a reason why. All right. Tips for preparing the RFP. This is the second bullet point for that. So exhibit forms, which must be completed as part of the proposal submission, will vary. It's absolutely true. So you'll see the exhibits for this particular RFP on the second page, Roman numeral 2. These are not the same for every single RFP. These are just the ones that are specific to this project. So for example, Exhibit 7, there's a data security and data security policy in place. The reason that is there is because there is a data related issue that this brings up. But if we're talking about providing services that has nothing to do with data security, then you will likely not see that exhibit. So every single project is customized, so it's really important, again, to read through that entire document. The company profile information, you'll see, is Exhibit 1, and then we have company references. We ask for that in a specific format. We prefer that you submit it in the format that we've specified. Exhibit 4, this is special conditions regarding minority and or women-owned business enterprises. I have to say that the special conditions document is one of the most overlooked documents in these solicitations, but it is very important. Because this is a city-funded project, there is a minority, an MBE and a WBE requirement, and the special conditions, Exhibit 4, will tell you absolutely everything that you need to know about MBE and WBE. So a lot of people just gloss over that, but it is a really important document. Contained in Exhibit 4, the special conditions, are forms that need to be filled out so that you can identify who your minority or women owned business subcontractor is going to be. So that's very important. Again, the online economic disclosure statement, which I've already talked about, and then an insurance certificate. And again, it's either you comply with the requirement, or if you're selected as a vendor, you would then provide the certificate. We do ask you to review the standard contract terms and conditions, and I didn't include that in this document because it's enormous. But you should also be aware that many times we issue addendum to the solicitation. So this document was submitted, was advertised. Let's see, it looks like the date isn't on here, but it looks like it was issued sometime in August of 2014. And the due date for this was October 7th. But what you don't know from this document was like a month after it was advertised, we issued a change to the requirements that were listed in here. So without seeing that addendum, you have no idea what it is, right? From looking at this document, we have no idea that an addendum was issued. We have no idea what that change is. The reason that I bring this up is that it's really important to register here at the bid and bond room. You can just give them a call to register as a document holder, because every time an addenda is issued, you will then get an email that says, oh, an addenda was issued for specification 119092. So you can say, oh, okay, well, they originally said they were looking for 10,000 hair tests annually, but now they're looking for 20,000 hair tests. And then your submission would be right, it would have the most up-to-date information. So a lot of times people don't register, so they don't know that any changes have been issued, and then their submissions don't really make any sense because the specification has changed a little bit. So really important to register as a document holder so that you can keep up with the communications of the solicitation as it is out on the street. It's very important to submit your proposals on time. I know that it seems like such a basic requirement that they're due at 4 o'clock. They're due at 4 o'clock. We get late proposals all the time. All the time. It is up to the CPO whether she will choose to accept a late submission or not. It's probably in your best interest not to leave it to chance. So definitely important to get your proposals in on time. We do ask for a cover letter that was in the required documents. It must be signed by an authorized officer. We do ask you to acknowledge any addendum in the cover letter. So many times we'll have, 3 addenda that were issued, but the company only got 1, and they only acknowledge 1. Well, that means that their response is likely a little off based on the information that may have been issued in the addendum. All of the other items on that page we've kind of gone over. So let's see. Proposal, evaluation, and award. So when vendors respond to an RFP or a bid, we post the names of the respondents on the city website. They're called bid tabulations. For actual bids, there's more information that's included in the bid tabulations, but for RFPs, it's typically just the name of the company that responded and when their response was, what time, what date their response was submitted. No other information about an RFP or a bid will be issued until contracts have been awarded. So many times we'll get requests for information, how many people responded, what were the scores of the evaluations. Information is not going to be issued until after a contract award has been issued. Any FOIA requests or Freedom of Information asks will be held until after contract award. So even if it's sent by email, right, even if like an informal request is submitted by email, or if a very formal FOIA is submitted, we really won't be able to answer any questions until contract award. We talked about the evaluation committee, that we evaluate proposals in 3 phases. Once determinations have been made, vendor selection and declination letters are always sent out. So if you have responded, you will receive formal notification whether your proposal was selected or if it was rejected. And we always have a negotiation of the terms of the contract, the pricing of the contract, that leads to contract award. So there are many cases in which we believe that we would like to enter into negotiations with a company, but there are scenarios where contract negotiations break down and they don't get issued an award. So it's not as though, oh, okay, great, you submitted this, a great price on this project, and you've determined, right, we've determined that you're qualified to do this work. There's still another step in between. We have to make sure that the EDS checks out, that your insurance coverage, all of these other things are as they should be before a contract award is issued. So that looks like we have finished up all of the PowerPoint slides. So at this time, I'd like to open it up to any questions that you may have. Yes, sir.
You mentioned earlier that this RFP requires audited financial statements.
Yes.
It must be audited versus reviewed or prepared.
So just for our YouTube audience, the question is this RFP identifies that 3 years of audited financial statements are necessary, and the question is that always necessary? So you are correct. We do specify 3 years of audited financials. In many cases, some companies are not required to do audited financial statements, or there may be a scenario where you've only been in business for 2 years. So if in the absence of audited financials, we will take unaudited ones or any other form of information that we can do some determination on the financial stability of your company. Sure. Sir? In the few years that I've been here at procurement, I would say no. There is no formal advantage. They need to respond to the RFP or to the bid just as any other bidder would. I would say, just from a practical standpoint, an advantage that they may have is that they have done business with the city in that particular area. But no, it's not like they get 5 extra points because they are the incumbent. Yeah. Yes.
I have a question, well, 2 questions.
Sure.
The first one, you went for the requirements. Are they pretty standard for every RFP, like cover letter and what have you?
Yes. So the question, sorry for the YouTube audience, is we indicate the required content in the solicitation, and is that information pretty standard? So yes, the information is pretty standard.
Okay. The second question has to do with the insurance requirements.
Yes.
What if you are in a business or you're offering a service, say like a commodity, where no one will physically be at the facilities, therefore the insurance may not be applicable?
Sure.
Is that something that the city will take into consideration when looking at the
Sure. So the question is regarding required insurance. If there is an area that may not be applicable, will the city take that into consideration? I would say yes. It would be, I would just include some sort of statement that explains your rationale for it, and we will take it into consideration. However, we may determine that the requirement still stands. So, but yes, you do have the opportunity to explain your rationale behind not, or behind not thinking that it's required in your scenario.
One more question.
Yeah.
Sorry. Now, the other question has to do with the MBE and WBE requirements.
Yes.
We talked about some of the required documentation, but for this, take for example, for this particular solicitation, it says that there are no goals
Correct.
that are required for this one. Would you then still need to fill out the information or no?
Sure. So the question is regarding MBE and WBE participation. This particular RFP that we're reviewing in the bid and bond room today states that there are no goals. And so the question is, would you still be responsible for submitting documentation that meets the goal? So you're correct. This solicitation did not have any goals. And the reason is the department, based on the type of project and based on the MBE and WBE vendors, the departments did not find that it was feasible to meet our standard 25 and 5 goals that are set out by City Council. So the departments requested a waiver of those goals, and that is what you see here. So that means that there are no MBE and WBE goals for this project. That does not mean that if you have an MBE, or let's say you are an MBE and that you want to provide service, or that you have the ability to provide service, that you can't or that you shouldn't use an MBE or WBE. It's just saying it's not required for the solicitation. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay, great. Sir? Not necessarily. Yeah. Again, this goes back to, in this solicitation, Exhibit 4, the special conditions. Let's say, for example, sorry, I didn't repeat your question. So the question was for our YouTube. I know. The question for the YouTube audience is, can you repeat that again?
If you don't meet
The goal.
WBE goals,
Yes.
should you even bother?
Got it.
bidding on
So the question is, if you cannot meet the goals that were set out in the solicitation, should you even bother to apply? So I would say yes. So let's say, for example, the goals are 25 MBE, 5 WBE, and you go through the MBE and WBE directory, but you can't find anybody that can provide service that you're looking for. Or let's say you call people. There are a bunch of certified companies, but maybe they don't have the niche expertise that you need to provide service. In your proposal, you would explain that. You would say, I understand it's 25 and 5, but here are the reasons why I can't meet that, and I would like to request a waiver based on that, right? Your waiver may or may not be approved, depending on the scenario, but you do have the option to request a waiver. Yep, sure. Yes?
So what's the best way to connect with, let's just say, a bigger company that you can fill it if you want to go and subcontract?
Yes.
What would be the best way to connect with those companies so that they know that you are a WBE?
Sure. So the question is, if you are a smaller company and you are interested in potentially pairing up with a larger company to do service, what is the best way of going about that? So I think I talked about pre-bid and pre-submittal conferences. I think that that's an excellent way to network with other companies. we almost, I certainly, when I have pre-bid conferences, I come right out and I say, you know, some companies are large, some companies are small, let's introduce each other, right? How can we make these connections? It is a great way to network with small and large companies, but what's great about the pre-bid and the pre-proposal conferences is that you know that the people in the room are interested in this particular project, right? So you're either in the same industry or you know, you have the expertise in that area. I mean, that is very specific to procurement in general, but obviously I personally believe that you should always just be doing outreach, right, and trying to market your services anyway. But that's just a great way for all of those pieces to kind of come together. I mean, historically, pre-bid conferences are not really well attended. I don't understand the reason for that. So it's really an opportunity for every business to, you know, to find subcontractors, to find prime contractors to work with. Definitely take advantage of that. Any other questions? Yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning that on certain RFPs, you can see where the funding is coming from, whether it's the city, state, federal government.
Yes.
Where do you find that at?
Usually it will state it, let's see. There's typically a section that says funding, but the portion of the solicitation that I did not give you, oh, actually, so if you look on the back, on the very back page, this is the first page of the sample agreement or the sample contract. So you can see in the top corner, it says city funded. You can usually find it there. Yep. Or if you go, you can actually just ask the buyer on that project, you know, what funds are paying for this.
And the bid takeout list, you just go online and
Yes.
have access to that?
Yes. So there are a couple lists that we put on the city website. Number one is all of the names and contact information of every individual that attends the pre-bid, pre-submittal conferences. So let's say you can't attend a pre-bid conference, but you want to maybe reach out to people that have. You can obtain that list. A list of registered document holders is available, and then also what we call the bid tab list, or the names of the companies that have submitted proposals for any particular RFP or bid. Correct. Yep, all of that is public information. Yes, sir. It's separate. Yeah, I would say the best way to find it is probably to email me, and I can give you the link. But everything is pretty much at cityofchicago.org/DPS. There's quite a few different places that you can find it, but if you want to shoot me an email, I can give you a few of those important links so that you can find the information more easily. All right, any more? Yes. Any more questions for today? All right, well, I think you have 7 minutes of your life back. Oh, yeah, so there are evaluation forms. If you can fill those out and submit it to us, that'll help us kind of provide a better workshop for you. We want to know if this has met your expectations or if there's anything else that you'd like to see, so please fill those out for us. Thank you. I have my business card.